Welcome, Lapham crew, guys, gals, ghouls, friends, fiends, foes, whoever may be listening beyond the omniverse tonight. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a Rocky Mountain High, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, October 1st, the beginning of the spooky month. Monday, October 2nd, for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. So glad you guys could join me this evening from wherever you're listening from. If you're listening live right now, you may be listening to us on Spreaker.com under We Are Paradox Media's show. You can also listen to us on eTalk Radio, which you can find at etalk.tv/radio, as well as KPNL Radio, which you can find on KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com. If you like to watch, you can watch us on YouTube Live, as well as Facebook under We Are Paradox Media, and I believe Twitch. So we're all over the place. If you want to listen to us in your free time, whether you're working it or working out, make sure you tune in to basically any place that you like to listen to your podcasts. Turn this down a little bit. I'm going red. Crazy. Oh, I can't believe it's so red. That's what she said. Well, tonight I have a treat for all my guys and gals out there. Tonight we will be doing a story time with me, your favorite host, TessaTNT. And we're doing more of Hollywood's unsolved mysteries, from Elvis, Marilyn, Jean Harlow, Link Adams, and beyond, the true stories behind 9 celebrated cases. So our next chapter is You Always Hurt the One You Love. Here we have Spencer Tracy, who called Harlow a square shooter, if there ever was one, and Jean in a scene from Riff Raff, one of several films in which they co-starred. Look at that, she's gonna knock him out. Let me move this mic just a little bit. Hopefully that helps. So here's a picture of Harlow autographing a portrait of herself by a fan. Look at Miss Jean Harlow, ain't she so cute? Chapter 8. Jean Harlow's infantile husband. She didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be happy. That was by Clark Gable in 1937. No matter what I do, I always end up on page 1. Jean Harlow, 1935. The body of Paul Byrne, the husband of EMGM screen goddess Jean Harlow, was found lying prone on the bathroom floor, adjoining the master bedroom. It was discovered by their butler, John Carmichael, on Labor Day, September 5th, 1932. Carmichael was well aware that a servant's first duty is always to his master's best interest, even in death. John Carmichael knew that those interests were in who to call first in such an emergency situation. He had worked for members of the oligarchy for many years and intended to go on doing so. He also knew the rules of the game. Under such circumstances, you never call the police first. Instead, Carmichael called MGM. The studio police officer on duty that Labor Day holiday immediately notified MGM's chief of police, W.P. Whitney Hendry, who was at his home in Santa Monica. Hendry knew what to do in situations such as the death of an executive under strange circumstances, which could affect the image of the studio. Quickly, he placed 2 phone calls. One of them was to Louis B. Mayer, the loathsome, autocratic head of MGM, and the other to Irving Thalberg, Byrne's immediate supervisor. Nobody had yet bothered to notify the police, not even Hendry, a former LAPD cop himself. Let me move this phone. He decided to go to 9820 Easton Drive first and look over the situation. There might be something that required fixing or sanitizing. Both Mayer and Thalberg, because of Burns' importance to the studio, and the fact that he was the husband of one of the biggest stars, sped in chauffeur driven by limousines to Easton Drive. Louis B. Mayer was first on the scene. Thalberg and Hendry were next to arrive. It was not until 2 hours later that the Los Angeles Police Department was notified of the death. Just what happened during those 2 hours will probably never be known definitively, but some of it can be pieced together from reports, inquest testimony, and grand jury transcripts from 2 sessions, as well as the legendary whispers passed down over the years. Paul Bern was born Paul Levy in Wandsbek, Germany, on December 3, 1889. Bern's family immigrated to the United States in 1898 when Paul was 8. His biographies reveal that when he was 14, Paul's formal education ended. Those who met him later in life nevertheless assumed Paul Bern was a highly educated individual. He was very well educated, but it had been a self-education. Paul Bern had grown up in the same neighborhood as the eventual mob finance director, the infamous Mayor Lansky. Both were small physically and had good minds, which probably contributed to their friendship. One summer day, Lansky rescued his friend from a gang of young Irish toughs who were engaged in the local sport of cockalizing. I've never heard that term. They opened Bern's fly to expose his circumcision. What they found, however, amused them even more. Paul's penis had never matured at puberty. After seeing what the youths were laughing at, Lansky felt sorry for his friend. He wanted to continue their friendship, but ashamed Bern avoided him thereafter. Paul Bern's first job was with the Produce Exchange Company in New York at the salary of $3.50 per week. While learning shorthand in night school, he obtained a job with the New York Gas Company as a stenographer. He began to write. Deciding to devote himself to the theater, Paul started as an actor with a small traveling company. He ended up as a stage manager for another small traveling troupe, as vaudeville-like acts abounded in those days. All were scratching out a living performing in civic halls and small theaters in the East Coast. After tiring of life on the road, Paul returned to New York and had a short stint as a press agent for a Broadway show. Several months later, he entered the motion picture business by going to work for Canadian Picture Company in Toronto. It was at that juncture that Paul Levy changed his surname to Bern. While working in Toronto in the then-infant industry, Bern realized that everything creative in the industry was happening in a small town called Hollywood. He boarded a train bound for Los Angeles to seek his fame and fortune. He knew little about the town or the production end of the industry, but Paul Bern was a vast learner. His first job was that of a film cutter. Progressively, he worked his way into the scenario department, as scripts were known in these days. He very soon became a script editor, directed some films, and at 37 became a supervisor at MGM. Irving Thalberg noticed Bern's ability in a multitude of production jobs and made him his general assistant. In effect, the number 3 man at MGM behind Thalberg and Mayer. In a prophetic article in the New York Morning Telegraph in 1927, Herbert Cruikshank shared a great deal of insight on Bern. Meet Paul Bern, and know that you stand in the presence of one blessed or cursed with the fearsome, terrible quality that sears souls, destroys minds. It so brilliantly lights that with the fierce fury of a flagellant whips its slaves on to accomplishment, to immortality, to death. I mean the tragic quality of a genius. Flowery prose, certainly, but unquestionably true to all those who knew Byrne. Cruikshank went on further to describe Paul Byrne: a slight man, insignificant in stature, slender of shoulder, only as tall as the girl. He has a dill of forehead, topped with a mop of hair, soft and fine spun, beautifully perhaps in a woman, and a man quite probably presaging premature baldness. The eyes are slightly bulging and deeply ringed, with a sooty rim that seems to make them smolder and then flash fire, much in the fashion of live coals lying in the smoky gray and burned out black ashes. Byrne's intellect was certainly brilliant, but it was accompanied by a temperament far more compassionate than most. Many people in Hollywood called him Hollywood's father confessor. Many people, not only on the MGM lot, but most of his acquaintances, took their troubles to Paul Byrne for advice, help, and sometimes sympathy. But there was also a noted peculiarity about Paul Byrne, that the producer. He thought that every movie he was associated with ought to have a happy ending. Sad endings, he told many of his co-workers, left an audience depressed. Paul Byrne hated unhappy endings to anything in life. This attitude was to haunt him during his lifetime. Paul Byrne took little part in Hollywood's party life and was considered something of a mystery man inside the enigma that was Hollywood. In fact, Byrne lived in such an out-of-the-way location that he was forced to put a sign beside the dirt lane that led to home which read, "This way to Byrne's house." He spent many secluded hours reading scripts and novels to recommend to Thalberg, all the while improving his mind. Occasionally he was seen at the more exclusive parties, never the wild ones where cocaine was available for the asking. From time to time he could be seen in such well-known night spots as the Trocadero and the Coconut Grove. Despite his clandestine habits, when Paul Byrne began to appear in public with Jean Harlow, nobody attached such significance to his sudden sociability. It took everyone by surprise when they showed up at the Marriage License Bureau in Los Angeles to get a license to marry. Harlow told the hovering courthouse City Hall beat reporters, "We were surprised ourselves. Mr. Byrne did not propose until last Sunday, and I accepted. We had spoken of marriage casually before then, but not until Sunday was the subject seriously considered." On July 2nd, 1932, the actress and the genius with death in his eyes were married in the home of Jean's mother and stepfather. Among the guests were Irving Thalberg and his wife, as well as another MGM star, Norma Shearer. Jean Harlow was to rue the day she agreed to marry Paul Byrne. What happened on their short marriage would eventually cause her death at a very young age, at the height of her stardom. The Jean Harlow of MGM had come a long way from Kansas City, from a short marriage which took place in Chicago and ended in Los Angeles a year later. Harleen Jean Carpentier, she was later to drop the Harleen and Carpentier, her father's name, and adopt her mother's parents' surname, grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. She spent the humid Midwest summers with her grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. S.D. Harlow, in Bonner Springs, Kansas, a rural farming community. Jean enjoyed the farm life and the animals, but hated returning every fall to the Barstow School, a private establishment for young ladies. In 1921, her parents divorced, and her mother took Jean to Los Angeles, where she was enrolled in the Hollywood School for Girls. Her mother dated various men on the fringes of the film business, extras, occasional actors, and production people. Jean enjoyed visiting the movie studios of Max Sennett and Hal Roach, the comedy kings of film world of the 1920s. Harold Lloyd, Laurel and Hardy, and Buster Keaton were just getting started when she made her early visits. In 1924, disappointment over a love affair Her mother removed Jean from school rather abruptly and moved the pair back to her hometown of Highland Park, Illinois. Now that she was blossoming into maturity, the boys began to notice Jean Carpentier's slender young body, her pert, firm breasts, and pretty face. She refused to wear a bra, a liberal statement she maintained throughout her life. The boys loved it, as would movie audiences a few years later. At 16, Jean met and fell in love with Charles Fremont McGrew II, a wealthy young man and several years her senior. Against her mother's wishes and lying about her age, they were married in Chicago. Her mother also had recently married a lounge lizard by a wealthy young man and several years her senior. Against her mother's wishes and lying about her age, they were married in Chicago. Her mother also had recently married a young lounge. See, this is repeating now. Hello, editors, let's not do this. By the name of Marino Bello. After a few weeks of Chicago, Jean talked her bridegroom into buying a house in Beverly Hills, so she could get away from her mother and stepfather. Jean was young and quite immature, but her husband overlooked this. He showed her off at Hollywood parties and made a lot of contacts. So here's a picture of Harlow and Clark Gable in a scene from Red Dust. It was well known that Harlow and Gable had an affair during the filming of China Seas. Gable always called her a good scout. And then just below that, Powell and Harlow 2 months before she died in 1937. Weekends were spent at Agua Caliente. Is that hot water? Ooh. Just below the Mexican border, and their afternoons were enjoyed at the racetrack. Jean loved to bet and mingle with the movie crowd at the Turf Club, then owned by Joseph Schenck. Because she hated to be away from her daughter, it wasn't too long afterward that her mother and Bello moved to Los Angeles. Bello felt it would be a mecca for his various get-rich-quick schemes by using the contacts of Jean and her husband. Meanwhile, through those contacts, and through contacts she had picked up around Agua Caliente, Jean started working in various films, including Hal Roach's Laurel and Hardy comedies. Her husband objected to this, particularly because she was an extra, but he came to find out he had no control over his wife's ambition to act in movies. Jean Harlow's first big job was at Paramount Pictures in Clara Bow's The Saturday Night Kid. As she became known amongst the movie crowd, Jean made friends with a veteran actress, the much-loved Marie Dressler. It was Dressler who recommended to Roach that Jean be given a larger part. Roach was not aware of Harlow appearing as an extra in some of his earlier films, and gave her a few lines in a series of comedies. Her first major appearance, with her name below the title as a supporting player, was in Laurel and Hardy comedy Double Whoopee. Double Whoopee! And that was in 1928. In 1929, because of the continuing objections of McGrew to her career, Jean filed suit for divorce. Soon after, her husband had arranged for a photographer at a Hollywood party to take some nude shots of his wife, drunk in a bedroom. The fate of their marriage was sealed. Jean recovered the negatives and prints, and she received a divorce just a few weeks following her 20th birthday. Because there was no time for a honeymoon, Jean and Paul's wedding night was spent in the house on Easton Drive. Following the departure of the last of the guests, Byrne and his bride continued celebrating until both were happily drunk. They retired to an all-white master bedroom, Jean in a revealing nightgown. She waited impatiently for Byrne to come to bed and consummate the marriage. Finally, he appeared in a bathrobe, but seemed preoccupied and distracted. That's not a good way to get it on your wedding night. Come on, now. The closer Jean tried to get to him, the further he retreated. It was then that Byrne revealed his terrible secret. He told her he would not be able to consummate their marriage. His organ, Jean then discovered, was the size of a child's, and it rendered him impotent. Drunk, Byrne threw himself at her feet, begging for her understanding. He hoped Harlow could work her screen magic on him. He claimed she was a sex goddess and could help him get an erection, something he'd never had before. Jean, furious, told him she was no goddess, and that she thought she had married a man who loved her for herself, not her glamorous image. She was furious at Byrne's betrayal, and that he had not at least warned her before their wedding. If ever there was a reason for premarital sex, this unholy union of Paul Byrne and Jean Harlow was a textbook example. In an alcoholic rage, they ranted and flouted each other. Jean's taunts pushed a proud, humiliated Byrne over the edge. He threw her to the floor and, while trying to perform fellatio, bit her thighs as savagely. So savagely, he drew blood. With uncontrollable fury, she was to tell her agent Arthur Landau that Byrne then beat her unmercifully with his walking stick until he passed out. Jean immediately called Landau and asked him to come and get her. He arrived in less than 20 minutes. Harlow jumped in his car crying and obviously in great pain. Once inside the safety of Landau's home, Jean lowered the blouse she had quickly donned before leaving. As Landau related in his biography of Jean Harlow, she whimpered, "Look at my back." She showed the Landaus 5 long welts stretching from her hips to her shoulders, and there were even more marks across her buttocks. They gasped when she revealed the bloody teeth marks on her inner thighs. She told the Landaus she never wanted to see him again. Landau was on the telephone with MGM executives until dawn, deciding what must be done. A scandal had to be avoided at any cost. Once again, the oligarchy decided what a well-known married couple would have to do in order to protect its marriage and box office stability. It was agreed that Harlow and Byrne would remain together in the house on Easton Drive until after a suitable length of time. 6 months was agreed upon. They would then quietly divorce. The charade began immediately with their formal wedding reception and obligatory publicity pictures for the fan magazines next afternoon at Easton Drive, which had been hurriedly catered by the MGM commissary crew. Most of Jean's friends were dressed to the hilt, but Jean's known casual manner allowed her to get away with loose-fitting green pajamas. She carefully maneuvered her way out of painful embraces of congratulations. Jean Harlow gave the performance of her life. The happy blushing bride, Mrs. Paul Byrne. The beating she took from Byrne the night before was to be the ruin of Jean Harlow. She would never totally recover from the internal damage she unexpectedly suffered that night. It was only when she later started to urinate constantly that she knew something was wrong. Following her appearance in Double Whoopee with Laurel and Hardy, a young Texas millionaire, Howard Hughes, was producing silent films and had just completed the biggest budget film ever, Hell's Angels. The film had cost Hughes more than $2 million. Hell's Angels was a story of World War I pilots and starred a famous Norwegian actress, Greta Nissen. Unfortunately for Nissen and for Hughes, talkies had arrived, and the film in its current state had to be scrapped. Following tests, Hughes realized that Nissen's broken English could not be the transition to sound and to be understood. Jean Harlow was on the same studio lot working regularly in roach comedies. She had suffered what she felt was an unfortunate accident. An inexperienced hairdresser accidentally overcooked her hair in a peroxide mixture, and as a result was now platinum blonde. Jean's luck turned abruptly, however, when Hughes spotted her walking across the studio lot. he immediately tested her for the remake of Hell's Angels. As a platinum blonde, Jean turned out to be exactly what Hughes was looking for. He signed her to a long-term contract. This did not sit too well with Hughes' current love, a very jealous actress, Billy Dove. Love, Dove, here we go rhyming. Hey, UFO Bigfoot. I know, could you imagine having a little tiny kid pee-pee? He should have let her know. Happy October, UFO Bigfoot! I'm so excited for Halloween. This year I'm going to be dressing as Elvira, Mistress of the Night. Should be fun. I need to find a bustier. So she was later to be a catalyst for another break in Harlow's career. It was in Philadelphia, while making 4-a-day stage appearances with Hell's Angels to standing room only crowds, that life was to change dramatically for Harlow. She became a star. In the audience one matinee was Abner Longy Zwillman, who introduced himself to Jean. She fell for him, and she fell hard. She did not learn until later that he was a well-known mob figure. Longy was his name. He followed her around the country tour as often as he could and told her he would see her in Hollywood very soon. Zwillman became Jean Harlow's boyfriend whenever he was in town. Jean was sitting on top of the world, but Zwillman, now feeling that Harlow should be making more money, and with a major studio, not an independent like Howard Hughes, and that guy was rich, like what the heck is wrong with Howard Hughes, began to ask for some long overdue favors from high-ranking members of the oligarchy. The first was Harry Kahn. The uncouth producer needed $500,000 to buy out one of his partners and form Columbia Pictures. Zwillman came up with the cash, literally in a suitcase. He also learned that Hughes needed immediate cash. He used the tactic that Billy Dove was now more jealous than ever of Jean Harlow and suggested Hughes loan her out to other studios where she could be more active. Hughes took the advice and loaned Harlow out for $3,500 per week to major studios. He was paying Jean $250. In rapid succession, her pictures included The Iron Man for Universal and The Public Enemy with James Cagney at Warner Brothers. This was followed by The Secret Six at MGM, Goldie at 20th Century Fox, and Platinum Blonde at Columbia for Zwillman's old friend Harry Kahn. It was then that Zwillman made his major move for the career of Jean Harlow, a move he eventually came to regret. He suggested to Howard Hughes that, since he was awaiting the cash for Hell's Angels to come in, he released Jean from her contract so she could become a major star for another studio. Hughes, who was averse to dealing with mobsters, agreed to release her contract to rid himself of Zwillman's presence around his offices. Hughes sold the contract to MGM, where Jean was immediately signed for $1,250 per week. That's a $900 pay bump? A tremendous salary in those days, even by Hollywood standards. But with several major films behind her, such as The Public Enemy and Hell's Angels, doing tremendous box office business, Louis B. Mayer felt she was a bargain and insisted on a long-term contract with raises every 6 months. Howard Strickling and his top flight publicity staff were ordered by Mayer to set about creating Jean Harlow into a major star. The biggest star in Hollywood was their goal. It was not very long after signing her contract at MGM that she first met Paul Byrne. She was told by her handlers at the studio and her agent Arthur Landau that Byrne had the reputation of being kind and helpful to young actresses, and was known in the studio circles as a ladies' man. Jean took an instant liking to the thin, balding little man. Elvira! Yes, I'm excited. And at Spirit Halloween, I finally found the snake earrings, UFO Bigfoot. So, like, when I ordered the costume, I tried to get the earrings, but they were sold out. But at Spirit Halloween, I think I got them for about $8. Those guys are so overpriced, but yes, I'm super excited. UFO Bigfoot, what are you going to dress up for Halloween? Are you going to be a Bigfoot? Are you going to be something else? Let me know. Leave a comment. I want to know, what are you going to be for Halloween? Gene Harlow's marriage did not sit too well with Longie's Willman, who, because of business, was spending most of his time on the East Coast. He sent his minion, Johnny Rosalie, to work to find out all they could about this guy, Paul Byrne, with a little tiny cute pee-pee. What Willman found out about Paul Byrne was to turn his life upside down. He eventually imparted to Gene that Paul Byrne already had a wife. What? Dorothy Millett, whom he had married secretly. What? They had lived openly as man and wife at the Algonquin Hotel in New York. Byrne, he added, was still supporting Dorothy Millett with regular checks of around $300 per month. Johnny Rosalie had done his research carefully for his mentors, Willman, on both coasts. Willman also revealed that Byrne had paid the cost of Millett's expenses at a nursing home for the mentally ill for several months. After returning to the Algonquin Hotel apparently cured, Millett, hearing about Byrne's marriage, was now on the West Coast living at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco. Byrne was aware of this and wrote her at the palace as evidence by a letter uncovered following his death. All this just added to the fire of hatred that Jean felt for her husband. Nevertheless, the studio insisted she stick out in the house on Easton Drive, the house Byrne had given her for a wedding present, mortgage and all. She went into a state of depression, self-destructive depression. Feeling sorry for herself, she donned a red wig many nights on leaving the studio and frequented places such as Clover Club, which had gambling condoned by the Los Angeles Vice Squad, the Trocadero, and even some small tacky saloons in downtown Los Angeles Main Street. She had one-night stands with taxi drivers and other men she met in the bars. She was promiscuous, carefree, and drank excessively. MGM was so powerful in those days that it kept most, if not all, of Jean's escapades from the press. Not even Jean's relatives around the country knew of her picadillos. Picadillos. That's a pretty awesome word. Upon arriving at MGM on Saturday morning, September 4th, to continue working on Red Dust, in which she was starring with Clark Gable, Jean received a call from Willman. His manner was casual, as Jean knew it, on their mini tryst in a cottage at the Garden of Allah in Hollywood. Nevertheless, Willman's meaning was clear. She was not to go home that evening, but to spend the night with her mother. Jean told Willman that she and Byrne had already planned to have dinner with her mother on Sunday night. Willman told her that was fine, but that he also wanted her out of the house on Saturday night as well. Byrne was not aware that Jean would not be home that evening when Dorothy Millett called to demand that he meet with her and her attorney. Byrne said he would receive a bungalow at the Ambassador Hotel, and privacy would be assured. Harold Garrison, who served MGM executives as handyman chauffeur and lived at the Byrne Harlow home, drove Byrne to the Ambassador Hotel about 7 p.m. Garrison was told by Byrne to have dinner, then come back and wait in the street behind the hotel. At Willman's insistence, Dorothy was disguised in a black wig and dark glasses. She was waiting when Byrne arrived. She introduced the man with her as a blonde, a name he often used. Byrne appeared to be more puzzled than alarmed that she would bring along an attorney after he had been supporting her for years without benefit or counsel. Nevertheless, he tried to keep everything on a high plane and civilized. After they had finished a room service meal, which Byrne insisted upon, Dorothy cut short Byrne's incessant chatter about affairs of the day. How, she asked him, could he do another woman what he had done to her? If he had any explanation or excuse, she wanted to hear it. Byrne went into his sobbing act, as Jean Harlow described it to her mother, when he was at a loss for words of an emotional nature. But then, by his own willpower and an attempt to turn the proceedings around, Paul regained control of himself. He told them he knew all too well what he had done to Jean, but he had no choice. He had been asked by the studio heads to marry her. The studio wanted to protect Jean from an Eastern gangster who had been demanding that she marry him. Zwillman liked the way things were going. Jean Harlow was never told prior to her marriage that Paul Byrne was requested by Thalberg and Mayer to woo and marry her. Paul Byrne realized he would be doing the same to Jean as he had done to Millette prior to their marriage. Hide from her the size of his penis and his impotence. I like impotence, though. Sounds pretty impotent. Following a briefing from the Howard, Strickling, and Thalberg, Byrne was told the studio had to protect itself and Jean from the clutches of an Eastern gangster who could cause problems for MGM, possibly the industry, if it was learned that one of its top stars was screwing a New York mobster at the Garden of Allah. Following this revelation by Byrne, Zwillman casually asked him if he knew the name of this gangster. No, admitted Byrne, but I can find out. Joe Schenck knows. Zwillman remained impassive, but asked no more questions. Dorothy Millette, who knew Byrne well, took charge. Her insight into her husband's problems soon had him wiggling. He finally acknowledged that it was a marriage in name only, and since the marriage was of that nature, he did not worry about bigamy. His only motive in agreeing to it was to improve his standing with Thalberg and Mayer, so that he could continue to care for Dorothy in the years to come. He then changed his story and said he had volunteered for the job of protecting Jean from this gangster. Dorothy Millette was about to call him a liar, but wanted to talk to Jean Harlow first. Zwillman terminated the meeting by telling Byrne he had 24 hours to find proof of his story. Tomorrow night, they would come to his home for a showdown. If Mrs. Dorothy Byrne remained unsatisfied, legal action would be taken. Byrne was pensive when he entered his limousine. Not a word was said as Garrison drove him to Easton Drive. If there was anything that Louis B. Mayer hated as head of MGM, it was paying employees for not working on federally mandated holidays such as Labor Day. But, to Mayer's fiendish mind, there was no law to say he could not make people work on Sundays. There were no strong unions or guilds in those days to force 5-day week in studios. So two of the top MGM stars, Robert Taylor and Jean Harlow, in a pensive mood on the set. Look at that girl. They look so excited. At the studio on Sunday, Jean spent the day in a rain barrel for a scene in red dust, but nothing went right. Watching Clark Gable get hot and bothered for her body simply was not as much fun as it had been. Gable told Harlow that he was going fishing the next day, Labor Day, in hopes that it would relax him. Jean's stepfather, Marino Bello, was never very far from Jean's paycheck. He had come to the studio to pick her up and volunteered to go to the show to show Gable how an Italian tide flies. Jean was happy that the hypocritive Bello would be out of town. It gave her an excuse to spend another night with Mama. A night which would be forever etched in the memory of Jean Harlow, the oligarchy, and Hollywood historians. After Jean Harlow had learned of Paul Byrne's marriage to Dorothy Millette, Zwillman suggested that Jean take a few days off and go to San Francisco to meet with the other Mrs. Paul Byrne. Zwillman would meet her there. The meeting took place at the Plaza Hotel where Dorothy Byrne was then living. Still in those monthly checks from her husband, she turned out to be 10 years older than Jean, 10 years younger than Paul. They talked of the little man who had done so much to mix up their lives. Dorothy had been a struggling young actress in one of the theatrical troupes for whom Paul Byrne worked on the East Coast. They had fallen in love, married secretly, and lived as man and wife at the Algonquin Hotel. Like Jean, Dorothy had not learned the truth about her husband until their wedding night. The shock had been a lasting one, but she agreed to stick it out and give Paul a sense of virility. After a year, she admitted she had cracked up under the strain, and Byrne placed her in an expensive sanatorium in Connecticut. She was still there when he went west on a quest of sexual stimulation, as he had put it to her before leaving. It was only after she learned that he had remarried without benefit of a divorce that Dorothy agreed to meet with Jean at the suggestion of Zwillman. Having met Jean, she liked her, but there was still a question of what to do about Paul Byrne. "Things have to be handled properly," Zwillman observed. The way he said it caused a chill to come over Jean Harlow. Perhaps, she thought to herself, she had read something into those statements that wasn't meant to be there. Little did she know how wrong she was. It was only a matter of time. Zwillman was silent during the ride back to Mark Hopkins, where Jean, her mother, and Marino Bello were registered. A block from the hotel, Zwillman stopped the Pierce Arrow and told Jean to walk the rest of the way. He did not want them to be seen together any more than necessary. He told Jean he would see her in Los Angeles in a few days. The household help of Carmichael, the cook, Garrison, and the gardener said that Byrne spent all of Sunday alone, eating and drinking a lot more than usual. They said later that Byrne received 2 telephone calls he said were anonymous. Carmichael, who answered one of the calls, said it was a man's voice. Byrne took the receiver off the hook. Jean was unable to reach him when she tried. He was very depressed and very apprehensive about the second meeting that night with Dorothy Millette and her attorney. Zwillman deliberately delayed Dorothy's trip to Easton Drive. He wanted Jean to come along. He needed to be sure to that the help was in bed and there weren't too many people around when they arrived. The Pierce Arrow, with Zwillman at the wheel and 2 Mrs. Burns in the rear seat, drove up to the rise to the house. There's like a hair or something tickling my toe. Zwillman rang the doorbell while Jean and Dorothy stood behind him. When Byrne opened the door, he was naked. Zwillman forced his way in, Millette close behind. Harlow stayed on the steps. Byrne retreated to the bathroom to get a robe. Millette followed him. She pulled out a revolver and shot Byrne in the head. He fell to the bathroom floor. Zwillman placed a note on the dresser that Byrne had written to Harlow weeks before. The note was to look like it had been written that night as a suicide note. It is believed that Byrne had contemplated suicide soon after their wedding night because of the harm he had done to Jean with his cane. At one of their meetings, soon afterward at the Garden of Allah, Harlow showed the note of atonement to Zwillman, who took it from her. The note read, "Dearest dear, unfortunately this is the only way to make good the frightful wrong I have done you and wipe out my abject humility. I love you, Paul." Postscript read, "You understand that last night was only a comedy." Doesn't sound very comedic to me. Zwillman matter-of-factly wiped the .38 free of any of Millette's fingerprints and pressed it into the still warm, lifeless hand of Byrne in order to obtain his fingerprints on the weapon. He then removed it and placed it near the body, a typical mob touch. Millette and Zwillman then joined Harlow in the powerful touring car. Jean was dropped off near her home, and Zwillman headed up the coast highway to return Millette to her hotel in San Francisco, 8 hours north. He did not want Dorothy Millette seen on a train or in a taxi. He knew the studio would be calling first and that Mayer and his minions were experts in making a murder a suicide for the sake of the industry. When the police were finally called by Carmichael and arrived on the scene at Easton Drive, Mayer left. but as he drove down the winding driveway, he spotted Howard Strickling. They spoke briefly. "Paul left a note," Mayer told him. "I decided it shouldn't be seen by anyone outside the studio, Howard, so I took it." At that, Mayer handed the note to a shocked and dismayed Strickling. He was horror-struck that Mayer would interfere and try to destroy what appeared to be evidence. "You can't do that," he told him, and very few men in Hollywood were ever able to say that to LB. "This could be a homicide investigation regardless of what the note says. If anyone ever finds out you took that, there'll be a god-awful stink. You've got to go back and give it to the cops." Mayer had his chauffeur turn the limousine around in the narrow space and meekly gave the note to the officer in charge. The officers read the note and tried for a moment to figure out its hidden meaning. Then they went back to their examination of the scene. The investigation revealed that Byrne had been shot while standing, nude, before a full-length mirror in the dressing room off the bedroom adjoining the master bedroom. A .38 caliber bullet had entered his right temple. Byrne was right-handed, passed through his brain, and emerged at the back of the head to bury itself on the opposite wall. A forensic official was in the process of digging out the bullet from the wall as Mayer handed the note over to the chief of detective team. The body, when found by Carmichael, was laying face down, the head turned with the right cheek against the tile floor. The death weapon lay a few feet from the body where his woman had placed it. On the dresser in Byrne's room was another pistol, also a .38 according to police records. Detectives investigating the death said it was obviously a case of suicide. However, Chief of Detective Chet Taylor said he felt there were too many discrepancies in this theory, and it ought to be investigated. One of the more pertinent questions he wanted answered was, why did it take over 2 hours to notify the police? A good question, but one which was never answered by Mayer, Henry, Strickling, Carmichael, or his wife, the cook. The homicide team made the usual investigation of the house and grounds, and they questioned the gardener and Garrison, the chauffeur. Other teams fanned out to the Bellow home to question Jean Harlow. However, a monkey wrench was thrown into this aspect of the investigation because Jean's physicians, called in by the studio, decided she was too hysterical to be questioned at this time. The police did not find out until later that Jean and her family were practicing Christian Scientists, and they did not even know a physician. The investigation at the Byrne household brought out that Jean and Paul Byrne had gotten along very well together, while they were in the house and within earshot of the staff of 4. This point, however, was to be violently disputed during later stages of the investigation. Here's a picture of the ubiquitous Joseph Schenck, shown here following his marriage to Norma Talmont. Look at those two lovebirds. Oh, ain't that sweet? The power of MGM was apparent at the inquest into Byrne's death. Jean Harlow was not called as a witness, a very unusual omission when you consider previous inquests in Los Angeles had never failed to call the widow or widower in any homicide investigation. According to those who were there, the questions asked of other witnesses were not nearly as pointed as they should have been. Howard Strickling and the oligarchy had seen to that. From the inquest emerged a concocted story. Byrne had created an argument on the night of his death so that Jean would be sure to spend the night at her mother's. She would have done so anyway. Early on Sunday evening, she returned to Easton Drive for a peacemaking session with Byrne. She left soon afterward to spend the evening with her mother. Bellow had gone fishing with Clark Gable and was not expected back until sometime Monday, and Mrs. Bellow did not like to be alone. The inquest, however, could determine no motive for suicide. The note was too ambiguous to fathom a reason for suicide, and no one knew what it meant. Jean Harlow could not explain it when she was asked about it following the inquest. The top writers in Hollywood couldn't have concocted a better screenplay than the one created over Paul Bern's body that Labor Day morning at Easton Drive. The official version of the inquest released to the press was that Bern had been suffering from a physical infirmity, making any marriage he entered into highly embarrassing. The strange part about the Bern-Harlow marriage to the unknown press and the public was, why did a man suffering from such an infirmity marry such a person as the highly sexed Jean Harlow? This question, of course, could only be answered by Thalberg, Mayer, or Strickling, and they were not about to comment and probably were not aware of Bern's problem. On their mid-morning arrival in San Francisco at the Plaza Hotel, Zwillman told Millette to be seen around the lobby before she went to her room and went to sleep. She purchased a paper and spoke with the desk clerk. 2 weeks later, an item about her received scant attention in the local press. The body of a woman identified as Dorothy Millette of New York was found in the Sacramento River. Her shoes, coat, and purse were found on the deck of the Delta Queen 14 days ago and linked to the victim. Her death has been ruled a suicide. During a background investigation by the police, it was learned that Dorothy Millette had left the hotel with a small bag Tuesday afternoon and boarded a cruise liner that plied the Delta between San Francisco and the California capital, Sacramento. 2 weeks later, 2 fishermen had found the badly decomposed body of Millette and called the police. The official verdict of her death was suicide. From a broken heart? From a guilty conscience in shooting her husband Paul Bern? Our general emotional instability following a stay in a mental institution. Had she suddenly realized during the drive back to San Francisco that she would not be supported any longer by the man she had killed and that she had no prospects for work? Did Zwillman have the suicide taken care of to rid herself of the only witness who might ever talk? What?
Instead of picking out my underwear, you picked out Lily's underwear for mine.
What? No, Lily's is on hers and yours is on yours.
Nope.
Go look at it.
You go look at it, because the underwear on mine is
Yours was Sonic and it was like
white.
Yellow. It was yellow and white. Did Lily already take a shower?
Nope.
Okay, we'll look through the clothes because she's got a pair and you have a pair. I got yours from your drawer.
One top. One on each top. On my side, the Rick and Morty shirt. Yeah, that is white and pink underwear.
What about the other one?
Still, Lily's underwear.
Weird. Okay, we'll get a different pair. And get out of here. I'm doing my show. Go now, boy. Alright. Our general emotional instability following a stay at a mental institution. Had she suddenly realized during the drive back to San Francisco that she would not be supported any longer by the man she had killed, and that she had no prospects for work? Does Zwillman have the suicide taken care of to rid herself or himself of the only witness who might ever talk? Suicide victims seldom take time to remove shoes and other items of clothing before killing themselves. These could have been removed for her to make it look like a suicide by whomever Zwillman had hired. When the San Francisco police gained access to her room at the Plaza Hotel following discovery of her body, they found a memo pad beside the telephone on the nightstand. There was nothing written on the pad, but the impressions from a previous sheet of paper could still be discerned. Only the word, however, could be raised with the existing chemical test of the day. The word was justification. 2 letters were also discovered among her effects. One was from Paul Bern, one from his secretary, Irene Harrison. The letter from Bern read, Dear Dorothy, I was very happy to receive your letter. I have been desperately trying to get away from here for both vacation and change of scene for the last year, but so far it has been quite impossible. I read with great interest that you are contemplating a trip to San Francisco. Of course, I cannot give you any advice because you yourself can be the only person to know what is best. If you do go, I hope that it will be a happy change. I understand that the Plaza Hotel is a fairly reasonable, attractive one. If you do change to any other place, we will find some way of supplying you with funds in a manner convenient for you. My love and best wishes always, Paul. Sometime in June, Burns' secretary sent a letter to Dorothy Millette at the Plaza Hotel. Dear Mrs. Millette, according to the arrangements agreed upon, I am enclosing a money order of $160 now due. Mr. Byrne has already left on his vacation, but I am at the office in the meantime, and if I can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to ask me. I hope you are comfortably settled in your new home. Sincerely yours, Irene Harrison, Secretary to Paul Byrne. So we're going to stop right there because we do have to go to our first music break. On this break, we have the lovely Miss Mia Savage. She's going to be singing Your Skeleton, Let Me Be Your Home, Our New Reality, and The Miriam Crypto. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
all the shit that he brings anymore. You're mine. You're mine. Tonight. You're mine. You're mine. You're mine.
Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tonight we're reading from more of Hollywood's Unsolved Mysteries, and it's been quite amazing. Let's go here real quick. So this Jean Harlow story is quite long, I must say. I was just looking on break, like, how long exactly is it? Pretty long. Just making sure I'm unmuted. So a year following Burns' death, a new grand jury was appointed, and its order of business was to investigate the investigator, District Attorney Burn J. Fitz. In order to do this, the jury foreman obtained the records of the previous grand jury, which had looked into Burns' death. The foreman claimed, "We are only interested in Fitz's expenditures for the grand jury." But Burn J. Fitz, who had been on the take for years, took offense to the best defense posture, releasing some of the testimony before the grand jury in the previous hearing to remove the focus from himself. It turned out that the most unusual revelations were in the testimony of Davis, the gardener of Irene Harrison, Burns' secretary. Burns' testimony was startling, to say the least. "I think it was murder. I thought so from the very beginning," Davies related. He told the panel that Carmichael had lied about the tragedy. He said Jean Harlow and Paul Byrne did not have a fight the evening before Burns' death. He said they always had gotten along well as far as they could. And as far as he could tell, Carmichael, said that Harlow and Byrne were always embracing and kissing each other, and Byrne was talking of committing suicide, when they really didn't do much hugging and kissing, and Byrne never did say anything about taking his own life. Then Davis claimed the suicide note was not in Byrne's handwriting. Whether the handwriting was ever checked by an expert was never discovered. Irene Harrison claimed that Jean Harlow had been the pursuer, not Byrne, during the courtship period. Harrison also noted that she had obviously been coached by the studio in her testimony. Mr. Byrne didn't look particularly happy at the reception following the ceremony, she observed. Then came a question that led to all kinds of speculation asked of Garrison, the Byrne's chauffeur. "Did you hear about the time Mr. Byrne found his wife in the hotel in Los Angeles with another man?" Garrison swore under oath that he had not. He also replied no when asked if he had ever seen Jean Harlow out with anyone other than Byrne. The transcript released by Fitz also contained the information after Davies was questioned by the police. He was summoned by the telephone to the Bellow home, where Jean had taken refuge from inquiring reporters and the police. Once at the Bellow home, the stormy Bellow told Davies, "It looks like you're talking too much. Move your wife and family to the garage apartment and keep your damned mouth shut about all this." According to Davis, Byrne had loathed Bellow, and Bellow certainly had never liked Byrne. Perhaps, as some friends said later, by Jean getting married, it shut off a lot of Bellow's income. Once Jean married, he had to earn a living. After this new inquisition, the Byrne death was still officially a suicide. A suicide it was remained ever since. Today, the only people debating the verdict are journalists such as Byrne Hecht, who reported in November 1960 issue of Playboy. Paul Byrne, remembered for having committed suicide as the impotent bridegroom of Jean Harlow, the grand cinema sexpot, did no such thing. His suicide note hinting that he was sexually impotent and had nothing, therefore, ending the comedy, was a forgery. MGM studio officials decided, sitting in the conference around Byrne's body, that it was better to have Paul Byrne as a suicide than as a murder victim of another woman. It would be less a black eye for the biggest movie-making heroine, the Belle Harlow. It might crimp her box office allure to have her blazoned as a wife who couldn't hold her husband. Although Paul Byrne was out of Jean Harlow's life, his impact was everlasting. To begin with, it took Jean Harlow weeks to recuperate from his death and return to work on Red Dust. When she did, she looked haggard and tired, but she managed to finish the film. After a proper period of mourning for the sake of appearances, Harlow, free at last, ended the jam with gusto. The sex symbol without a man made up for lost time with several drunken sexual binges in Northern California, where she was not as likely to be recognized. She again donned the red wig on most days. All of these binges Strickling and MGM managed to keep out of the papers. 1 year and 2 weeks following Byrne's death, Jean earned herself another stall in Louis B. Mayer's dog kennel. First, she told him to go to hell when the loathsome man went on to make and asked her to screw him on his infamous office couch. Then she earned Mayer's everlasting enmity. She eloped with her Red Dust cameraman, Hal Rawson, 16 years her senior. Mayer was furious. He believed that a married sex symbol was box office poison. It didn't last long. They divorced after 7 months of sexless marriage. Rawson moved to London and worked in the British film industry for several years. Jean, however, was a workhorse for MGM. She made a hit with Clark Gable in Anita Loos' Hold Your Man. She played a star surrounded by a freeloading family in Bombshell, her favorite film, and her scenes opposite the surly Wallace Beery in Dinner at 8 were considered to be some of her best work. So here's a picture of Louis B. Mayer, one of the most loathed men in Hollywood. Loathe him. Loathe, I say. He does look like quite a prick. Let's see here. In 1935, MGM starred her in a musical, Reckless, and used doubles for her singing and dancing. It was while making this film that she met the one great love of her life, the urbane William Powell. Shortly after the two met, they fell in love. Their first public exhibition of this attraction, A Passionate Kiss, was captured by a photographer. Their fans thrilled to the news. This put to lie the theory of Louis B. Mayer that public would not accept a married sex symbol. Harlow and Powell Kiss was on the cover of Time magazine. Jean Harlow was maintaining a grueling 6-day week schedule of filming. Up at 5:30 a.m. and at the studio by 7 a.m., she was making film after film to pay off her debts and those incurred by Byrne during their brief marriage, as well as the bills her stepfather had run up in her name before he ran away from Mama Bello. At a party on the set of Riff Raff, which she was making with Spencer Tracy, Harlow and Powell announced their engagement. They said they were to be married in a few months. This was not to be. In December 1935, while making A Wife vs. Secretary with Gable and Myrna Loy, Jean collapsed. Mama nursed Jean at home with a Christian Science practitioner at her side, but her bladder condition was far more serious than either would admit. Her film crews were so accustomed to Jean's frequent breaks to go to the bathroom that Mayer ordered a portable john to be installed on the soundstage for her. But now bladder problems had made her too ill to work. All of Jean's problems resulted from that terrible beating the horrible little man Paul Byrne had given her with his cane on their wedding night. Jean had never gone to a doctor and therefore had no knowledge of the internal injuries Byrne had inflicted. She did not know that the beating had severely damaged her kidneys because she and her family were practicing Christian Scientists. No effort was made to obtain treatment or even a diagnosis of her problems from a physician. No amount of cajoling by MGM officials or Powell could get her to change her mind. Not wanting to stir up any commotion, she kept her problems to herself. Jean never told anyone about the pains in her lower back, not even her fiancé Powell, because the doctor thing would come up again. Unaware of how serious her condition was becoming, she put off even considering seeing a physician. After a few days' rest, she was back at work as diligently as before. Harlow filmed Personal Property with Robert Taylor. In January 1937, she left for a publicity tour with Robert Taylor to promote the film. So this is Paul Byrne, a studio picture when he first became employed by Irving Thalberg. Look at that little man. Just look at him. Luckily, we're not seeing his little man. Wedding reception of Paul Byrne and Jean Harlow insisted upon by the studio, even though Byrne had done irreparable damage to Jean's kidneys on their wedding night. Jean wore loose-fitting green lounging pajamas to cover up the marks on her back and give her less pain than with tight clothes. So left to right, there's Irving Thalberg, Harlow with her mother hidden right behind her, Norma Shearer, Thalberg's wife, Jean's stepfather, Marino Bello, con man and seldom far from Jean's paycheck, and Byrne. Look at him. He's just smiling at his little pretty money horse. 4 months later, Harlow became seriously ill with an inflamed gallbladder. Hal urged her to take a rest and for God's sake to see a real doctor. But Life magazine's recent cover girl was in the middle of shooting yet another film, Saratoga, with her old friend Clark Gable, and would not be bothered. At 26, with all her debts erased and an impending marriage to another great star of the 30s, Jean Harlow's hard work was finally paying off. She thought she was headed for a very fruitful and stable period in her young life. Then on Saturday, May 29, 1937, almost 5 years since the beating by the fiendish Byrne, Jean Harlow collapsed in Gable's arms during a scene in Saratoga. She was exhausted and assumed she just needed another rest over the weekend. She went to Mama Bello's despite the protest from her fellow workers that she be taken to a hospital. Her already damaged kidneys, severely weakened by the gallbladder attack, were beginning to fail. But no one, not even Jean, knew what was happening. The studio should have exercised contractual control over Jean Harlow and insisted she see the studio medical doctor, who was always on call. This was a fatal error. Mama Bello saw this as a chance to put anyone and everyone in her debt by some inverse sense of reckoning. She and a practitioner tried to heal Jean through simple prayer. She assured all of Jean's friends who telephoned over the few days that Jean was recovering very quickly. When Jean Harlow did not return to the set by Tuesday morning, her friends decided to see what was happening. Author Landau, Gable, Frank, Morgan, Powell, director Jack Conway, and producer Bernie Hyman literally had to force their way into the Bello home. Reluctantly, she led the sextet into Jean's bedroom and pointed triumphantly toward her daughter. "Doesn't she look better now?" Mama Bello asked them. The 6 men stared in horror at the sight. Jean Harlow lay semi-conscious, moaning and belching, nauseated and burning with fever. Her back, chest, and shoulders were racked in pain, her pulse erratic. Mama Bello's idea of better was killing her daughter. She had been devoutly adhering to Christian Science principles and adamantly refused to let a doctor see Jean. Landau and Hyman tried frantically to reach Bello and Jean's real father for permission for surgery, but neither one could be located. With time running out, they searched for another way around the stubborn Mrs. Bello, who was adhering strictly to the tenets of her family religion. At last they discovered a paragraph in the Christian Science doctrine, or whatever, which stated that nurses could be present in extreme cases. Mama finally yielded to their pleas, but frustrated the nurses' every effort in caring for her. She remained in the room constantly and even slept there as Jean lay dying. By Sunday, June 6th, the situation was desperate. Jean's closest friends stood by helplessly, watching her life slip away. She now needed massive sedation for her pain, as her kidneys were literally being ripped apart by her diseased gallbladder, which she should have had removed many months before. One of the nurses said she could smell urine on Jean's breath, a sure sign of uremic poisoning. With nothing left to do, Hyman and Landau sent to see L.B. Mayer in his beachfront home. Mayer was no fan of Jean Harlow, even though she was one of his studio's major box office draws. Immediately, he called Jean's mother and ordered her to allow Jean to go to the hospital. Mayer was the one person Mama Bello feared most, and consented. The ambulance screamed its way through the streets to the Good Samaritan Hospital. Jean was diagnosed as being too weak to undergo surgery, so emergency blood transfusions were to be administered during the night. By morning, she was comatose. Her breathing weak and shallow. Doctors called in the Los Angeles Fire Department inhalator squad, but even that was useless. William Powell maintained a 24-hour vigil at her bedside. At 4:37 a.m., Jean Harlow was dead, the residual effect of a beating administered to her by Paul Byrne, the same man 2 members of the oligarchy had ordered to woo and marry Jean Harlow to protect MGM's image. By doing so, they contributed to Jean Harlow's death, even though it occurred 5 years later. In essence, she was murdered by Paul Byrne on her wedding night by that beating with his cane. While the studio never came or gave a reason, the powers that be at MGM must have had somewhat of a guilty conscience. Several months after Jean's death, her estate was probated to be worth less than $50,000, with some debts still to be paid. MGM agreed to pay her mother, who had divorced Bello in 1935, a lifetime pension of $500 per month. This was paid until her death in 1958. The murder of Paul Byrne and the very tragic, unnecessary death of Jean Harlow certainly have to be ranked very high on any list of Hollywood's unsolved mysteries. So here's a picture of Jean and her mother on the set of China Seas at MGM. They look so similar, it's hard to tell, like, who is who? So her mother must be the one in the feathers, and she's got to be the one in the coat. Or is it opposite? I don't know. They both look so young. Adios, adios, nenita mia. So the Mexican Spitfire, look at her go. Ain't she hot? She's a hottie biscotti. The Mexican Spitfire left no more. This is Chapter 9. An RKO Radio Studios portrait of Lupe. Look at Lupe. She's so gorgeous. Wow, no. If I feel gay, I act gay. If I feel like a happy puppy, I wiggle like a happy puppy. When I am mad, I scream. When I am in love, I sing. When I make love, I scream in ecstasy. Is this being wild? No, it is being Lupe. And that's by Lupe Velez from a 1939 interview. So when the maid went to the second-floor bedroom of Lupe Velez at 9 a.m. on the morning of December 5th, 1944, there was no Lupe in sight. The 8-foot square bed was empty. The aroma of scented candles could not erase the stench. It reminded one of the odor left behind by Skid Row derelicts after a bout with mescatel and homemade gin. Juanita, her chambermaid, followed the trail of vomit she saw on the nap of the white carpet to an adjoining bathroom quarters of the Spanish-style house on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. There she found Lupe Velez with her head down the toilet bowl, drowned, or so the coroner ruled. A huge dose of Seconal sleeping pills downed by the fiery actress had not been fatal. Instead, they joined company with a spicy Mexican dinner and apparently revived the dazed Lupe. Being the fastidiously neat person she was, Lupe, to the trained eyes of the police investigating her death, had attempted to reach the bathroom in order not to throw up her huge bed. From the marks on the orchid tile bathroom floor, it was apparent that Lupe had slipped on her vomit in an attempt to throw up in the toilet. She had fallen headfirst into the bowl of the Hush Flusher Deluxe model Onyx toilet and did not have the strength or the willpower to pull her head out of the huge water-filled bowl. The large dose of Seconal she had ingested had totally dulled her senses, but not killed her. This was how Lula Parsons described the scoop. on the farewell scene in a page 1 black-bordered exclusive of the death of Guadalupe Velez de Villalobos, aka Lupe Velez, aka the Mexican Spitfire. The wind was howling in the small village of San Luis Potosi, Mexico, and the rain was so fierce it was penetrating the windows of Colonel Jacob Villabosa's casa. It was a wild night, and the worst storm to hit the village in years. In a bedroom of the casa, a woman writhed and moaned as her labor pains worsened. The local midwife clocked the time between pains on an ancient clock in a room lit by a flickering light of candles. This was on July 20th, 1909. Electricity had not yet arrived in San Luis Potosi. The troubled prayers of the midwife amidst the storm were an insightful prediction of the stormy life which the newly born Guadalupe Velez de Villalobos was to live for the next 30 years. On her birth, the midwife, peering at the red-faced, squalling infant wrapped in a blanket, uttered some prophetic words. "She is stormy, this one. I pray the good God for her soul." In the freewheeling playground of Hollywood in the 1920s, Lupe was perhaps the most freewheeling of all. One of the least inhibited in an era of few inhibitions. It was the days of bootleg whiskey and nouveau riche moguls, who arrived in Never Never Land on the back of produce trucks as junk dealers, glove salesmen and fishmongers, junk peddlers and brothel keepers, graduates from the tough sidewalks of New York and points east. Many habitues of Hollywood parties of those days repeated tales about how Lupe climaxed the boast about her charms by lifting her dress up around her neck. As Lupe refused to wear any lingerie underneath, this was a fairly effective way of demonstrating those charms and dispel any doubts about them. Lupe was a tiny woman, 5 feet 1.5 inches, and her weight never varied more than a pound or two from her normal 108 pounds. They say that until her death, she looked like a teenager. Lupe achieved Hollywood stardom at the age of 18, and many people have said that may have been her downfall. For the rest of her life, she was well known for childish appetites, whims, and the gaiety and rage which appeared to everyone to be so shallow. But none of these foibles made Lupe attractive. All Hollywood loved Lupe Velez, the Mexican Spitfire, the girl from San Luis. She was warm-hearted, generous to a fault, fun, loving, and completely without malice toward anyone or anything. Lupe's Catholic schooling ended at the age of 14, and she went to work as a shop girl in Mexico City. During one of the constant revolutions that disrupted Mexico in the early 1920s, Colonel Villalobos was away with the army chasing bandidos, who in turn were chasing the federales. The Villalobos family was destitute. Ever since she appeared as the lead in the musical comedy at a child dancing school, when the family was between revolutions, Lupe knew she wanted to be an actor, and she wanted to make her career as an actress. She went to a theater in Mexico City and applied for a job. She was to relate in an interview years later. The manager of the theater asked to see her act, but she didn't have one. He told her he needed someone who could dance, like Gilda Gray, and sing an American song. Lupe spent the entire afternoon at a gray movie absorbing the elements of the shimmy. She then stood in front of the phonograph record store listening to customers try out American recordings. The next morning she sang Charlie My Boy in broken English. The song was the current rage in Mexico City, and that was all Lupe had heard in that record store the day before. She got the job. Chorus boys, wealthy stage Johnnies, and the neighborhood boys were quick to realize that the early ripening madcap was physically ready for a roll in the hay, even if Lupe was unconscious of it herself. Impatiently, Lupe brushed away their advances. She preferred to sit in what consisted of her dressing room, a closet next to the stage, practicing face-making in a mirror, to mooning in the moonlight with horny men. "All the time I study," she said. Hour and hour I change the hair to find how Lupe looks best. I study pretty ladies. I follow them in the street. I watch every move. I learn from it all, she related. Lupe became locally famous for the wild abandon of her dancing act. Then a visitor took word of it back to Hollywood, where director Richard Bennett was casting The Dove and needed a girl to fill a role. He sent Lupe an offer. In later years, Lupe claimed she had been a headliner in Mexico and was earning $350 per week. Actually, her salary was $50 a week, and it went through her fingers as fast as she got it. On the night she left for Hollywood, she drew her last pay envelope. She blew the equivalent of $29 on a new dress and boarded the train with $21. What happened next is typical Lupe folklore. On the train is this beautiful woman, or this beautiful man, she related later. I flirt with him, of course, and he, goddamn, steals from me $20. Always men hurt Lupe. Always I must fight with them. Always, always. Never have I met a man I do not have to fight, and fight, and fight. She arrived in Los Angeles with a single dollar in her purse and a telegram from Bennett. She eventually found a hotel clerk who would give her a room even though she had no money. He accepted the telegram as a guarantee that the room would be paid for. Unfortunately, Lupe had been delayed in leaving Mexico due to problems in obtaining a passport and visa, so Bennett had already filled the role. He did, however, recommend her for Fancon or Marco, who organized girly shows which toured the sticks and stocked some of the better vaudeville houses in the bigger towns. They put Lupe in Music Box Review, one of their better units put together for the Los Angeles trade. Fanny Bryce saw Lupe in it and sent Flo Ziegfeld an enthusiastic telegram. He asked Lupe to come to New York for a tryout. So here's Gary Cooper, a true love of Lupe's, and vice versa, but Coop, as he was known, had to give up the romance. Lupe's sexual demands were too much for him to take, including one episode crossing the intersection of Wilshire and Westwood Boulevard at rush hour with the top down on his convertible. This was an episode related to a Hollywood columnist by Coop, who related it to the author over 4 or 5 very strong martinis at Stefanino's restaurant. There is her love. Oh, look at him. Isn't he so good? That's Coop. Cooper. If Lupe had accepted the showman's offer, things might have turned out far better for her in the long run. Instead, after turning her down repeatedly, MGM suddenly decided that it wanted Lupe Velez. However, she refused a screen test and got on a train, bound for New York, unable to comprehend why anyone, let alone a young Mexican performer, would refuse an MGM screen test. Irving Thalberg sent Harry Rapp rushing across town to intercept Lupe. Apparently, he was so breathlessly persuasive that he and Lupe jumped off the Santa Fe Chief just as it started to move out of the Pasadena station. So here's a picture of Lupe and Leon Hero, her foil in several Mexican Spitfire films at RKO. And then here's Lupe again in a pensive scene from a Mexican Spitfire film at RKO in 1943. Look at Lupe, isn't she so beautiful? She's such a pretty girl. Once it had her under contract, MGM was at a loss to know what to do with her. There was no Zorro or films about one of the numerous Mexican revolutions being made at the time, not even a Pancho Villa epic. For lack of something better to do, they cast her in a too-real Laurel and Hardy comedy in which her face was the recipient of custard pies. Could you imagine? Good Lord. Her inhibition and uninhabited actions on and off screen made her well known all over town, long before her first week as an MGM player was over. This proved to be very fortunate, for Douglas Fairbanks Sr. was looking for a girl to fill a role in his screenplay described as willing to fight a man as love him. It was a tailor-made role for Lupe. That's Lupe, Fairbanks was told by at least a dozen people who had seen her around the Culver City studio. When she puckers up her lips, it is impossible to tell if she's going to kiss you, bite you, or spit on you. Intrigued by the description, Fairbanks went to see her and then borrowed Lupe from MGM to its considerable profit. For the Gaucho, his independently produced swashbuckling tale of an Argentine cowboy. Lupe was required only to be herself, and her fiery, sexy performance was a smash hit with audiences and producers. Fairbanks was part owner of the recently formed United Artists, bought 17-year-old Lupe's contract. She then found herself playing Chinese, Eskimo, Japanese, Hindu, Swedish, a Swedish Mexican, what? Malayan, Javanese, and French roles. Her popularity climbed at the box office with each picture, and by the time she was 19, Lupe Velez was a top Hollywood star. In a town so famous for its unconventional people, Lupe exceeded even the antics of Clara Bow and John Barrymore. In the beginning, she pretended to understand less English than she really did. Hollywood wits thought it a great joke to teach her blistering curses, telling her these were sophisticated Hollywood idiom. Mischievously, Lupe went along with the gag. She pretended to believe them, with that innocent air she could assume so skillfully. She would interlace her casual talk with very unladylike purple phrases. Interviewers from fan magazines, newspapers, and studio publicists fell for the gag. Almost every story written about Guadalupe Velez de Villalobos in the 1920s relates how Hollywood humorists took advantage of poor little Lupe. What they didn't realize was that Lupe Velez had used all those words and more when she blistered the hides of American immigration authorities, when they would not let her enter the United States without a passport and visa, an oversight which cost Velez her role in The Dove. This is the way Lupe Velez was described in various noteworthy sources in the late 1920s. Lupe Velez, put it mildly, is a nut. Saturday Evening Post. She is perpetual motion, a description with which her worn-out boyfriends agree. Vanity Fair. Lupe acts, in general, as if she just downed several bottles of tequila, Florence Ziegfeld. In typical fashion, Lupe shrugged it off. People come to my movies to have a good time. If I don't have a good time, they don't either. Lupe's first big, widely publicized love affair was with discarded lover of Greta Garbo, John Gilbert. Garbo preferred her lady friends. In her book From Under My Hat, Hedda Hopper recalled an incident about Lupe and the time the Mexican Spitfire asked her whether or not she should marry Gilbert. After all, said Lupe, I'm no lady. Hopper, in her own inimitable way, replied, Lupe, what's the advantage of getting married? Tell me now, honestly. According to Hopper, that was the answer Lupe had been waiting for. Beaming, she rushed over to Gilbert and yelled, Hey, Jack! We don't have to get married! When the romance with Gilbert soured because of his difficulty in making the transition from silent to sound, Lupe met the first great love of her life, Gary Cooper. Coop! She was an incurable flirt, but this was the real thing. She met Cooper when she was loaned to Paramount Studios to star opposite him in The Wolf Song as the Spanish love interest. She became his love interest off-screen as well. Cooper's romance with Clara Bow had just ended, and when Lupe reported for work on the Wolf Song set, according to those who were there and the Hollywood press corps, it was love at first sight for both, and most definitely an attraction of opposites. Cooper was quiet, Lupe was loud. He was even-tempered, she was volcanic. He used a minimum of words, and she talked constantly. It was a hectic romance, spent mostly horizontal when they were away from the studio. Quite often they were horizontal in other dressing rooms between takes. But what was obvious was that it was a genuine love on both sides. By Hollywood standards, it lasted a long time. 3 years after they met, a reporter cornered Cooper with the question, what is the biggest thrill you've gotten from motion pictures? Cooper, always a man of few words, replied simply, Lupe, and changed the subject. However, when he was placed in a position in the late 40s, even though he was reluctant to discuss it, Coop did make a statement, "Well, I guess I was in love with her." About her romance with Coop, the madcap Lupe was not so closed-mouthed. One of her joys was to telephone some of her reporter friends and give them the blow-by-blow descriptions of her love affairs, particularly Cooper. Frequently, blow-by-blow was an apt description. Among the gifts Cooper bought Lupe during their romance was a male eagle for a pet. What? Hello, beautiful sister Sandra. She got a male eagle. What? That is insane. She was so enthusiastic about her adroitness in the bedroom to think that any creature should be deprived of such fun and games. Because of Lupe's insistence, Coop, as he was known, went out and either trapped or purchased another eagle. No one ever discovered how he acquired such a bird. Unfortunately for the libido of both, the second one also turned out to be male. Eventually, Cooper had to give up the ghosts he was rapidly beginning to look like. He found Lupe too demanding, sometimes 3 and 4 times a day, no matter where they were. She was just too exhausting in her female demands, and would unbutton Cooper's fly anywhere she could, and play it like a piccolo, or acquire the use of any horizontal surface near at hand. Coop once described one such event to a close friend, Harrison Carroll, a columnist for the Los Angeles Herald-Express. Coop once described for me how Lupe unbuttoned his pants and went down on him while they were driving down Wilshire, crossing Westwood Boulevard at rush hour. The light changed to red at most inopportune time, the crucial moment of oral gratification. A delivery truck stopped in the right-hand lane. Coop turned beet red and lowered his 6'4" frame as low in the seat as possible. Lupe proceeded to replace the lipstick recently deposited on his now very limp organ while they waited for the light to change. He said that was the last time he ever had the top down on his convertible with Lupe in the car. The breakup came in 1930. Lupe was at the peak of her fame and beauty. Slightly over 5 feet tall and still 108 pounds, her hair was a glossy black, which set off her olive Latino complexion. Her figure was one of the most beautiful in Hollywood. No less an authority than Errol Flynn claimed in print that she had the most beautiful breasts he had ever seen. Flynn also told a curious tale about Lupe's ability to rotate her breasts in opposite directions. He claimed he had seen her do it at a party. Another of Lupe's stunts was to be interviewed in bed, preferably by male reporters from fan magazines or newspapers. She would jump up from under the sheets in a very revealing transparent nightgown to act out something she was describing. It wasn't always polite, and it was usually very suggestive. As a child in Hollywood, Lupe was a handful. Her mother, a very devout Catholic, was constantly horrified at her daughter's actions. As a child, she was forbidden to use lipstick or face powder, so she improvised her own from strawberries and flour pilfered from the meager supplies in the pantry of the Villa Lobos Cucina. The effect was grotesque on the 9-year-old, but Lupe was so entranced she kissed her reflection in the mirror. Years later, John Barrymore, starring with her in Playmates, expressed surprise at her acting ability. "I teach me," Lupe cried, delighted with Barrymore's flattery. "When I am little girl, I put on my brother's pants and I walk and talk just like him. And I do the same with my mother, my father, and everyone I meet. My mamacita, she says, 'Lupe, this is not polite.' But poof, who wants to be polite when she can be an actress?" As she grew older, the stage-struck little Mexican girl wanted to spend every minute in a theater. Then she would come home and practice the dancing and emoting she had seen that day. She continued her self-teaching even in the unlikely atmosphere of a convent school. One of the girls in school knew how to strum a ukulele and taught Lupe some chords. It was not longer after that that Lupe Velez made her debut at the Mexico City Theater, dancing Gilda Gray's Shimmy and singing Charlie My Boy. Because of her success, Lupe built a mansion in Laurel Canyon. Her bedroom was stocked with 75 canaries. One of her delights was to dance around the room and sing with them. So it's canaries, not canaries, canaries. She claimed to know each bird personally and flew into a cursing rage if anyone doubted her word. It was said that Lupe Velez never just entered a room, she burst into it. Often she would announce her presence with a loud song in Spanish and English. After numerous lectures from studio publicists and well-meaning friends, she was finally convinced that this was undignified. She went to several parties as the new Lupe and moped around for half an hour. Then, unable to stand dignity any further, she left without a word to anyone. As she put her white convertible in gear, startled guests heard her shout, "Now goddamn, I can be happy." Then she would wheel down a driveway singing at the top of her voice. I like this Lupe. She's so funny. Those who tried to change Lupe Velez gave up after this. Lupe was, as she tried to tell them, Lupe, and they might as well accept her as such. Man, we gotta end it here. Alright. Well, we can go a little further. Let's go a little further. I want to read more about Lupe. Oh man, look at that guy. In 1933, she up and married Johnny Weissmuller, the 1932 Olympic swimming champion, who was swinging from tree to tree as Tarzan and from bed to bed as many Hollywood starlets as he could. The marriage lasted for 5 stormy years, through 3 official separations and numerous public brawls. As usual, Lupe was not reluctant to discuss her romance. On one occasion, she told Harrison Carroll how she would awaken in the night and stare at Weissmuller because he is so beautiful. Then, for no reason, I punch him right in the nose. He jumps up and says, "Mama, you hit me." And I say, "Darling, I am sorry." Hit me back. And he says, "Never mind, honey. You couldn't help yourself." Once she stormed out of the house in the middle of the night, caught a train to New York, and took a Cunard liner for Europe. Another time, she physically threw a girl out of a party for making eyes at me, Johnny. When the marriage broke up finally in 1938, Lupe gave her honest opinion of wedded bliss to Photoplay. "Marriage, it stinks. I don't like these husbands saying, 'Where you been?' If you love a man, should you sit home sad all the time? No. Lupe does not believe in loving just one man." Warming to her subject, she went on, "So you go with another man to have a good time. This husband with Mueller, he gets mad. Lupe will not sit home for any man." In the next 6 years, she had a succession of men friends. Her career reached its peak and declined, but her spectacular and colorful life had no equal, and she made good copy for print columnists like Parsons and Hopper, as well as fodder for radio gossip hosts George Fisher and Jimmy Fiddler. In 1944, Lupe met a man who was so to be her downfall, who stirred her more than anyone ever since Gary Cooper, aka Coop. He was Harold Raymond, a handsome European of doubtful parentage, as the gossips were to say later. He arrived in Hollywood in 1944 from somewhere, as Luella Parsons wrote, and claimed to be a freedom fighter in Europe. He also claimed to have fought the Nazis in his native Vienna and in Prague, where he had been captured and sentenced to Dachau. He intimated that he managed an unreported escape from that infamous stalag and went to France, where he fought for some time with the French underground. Friends warned Lupe that the husband European was using her to further his career or so-called actor, or to at least sell his story as an adventurer for a film plot. At these suggestions, Lupe blistered the air. "This man is not like other men. I love him and he loved Lupe." Little did Lupe realize how right her friends would turn out to be about Harold Raymond, the son of an Austrian mother and an itinerant Yugoslav. Lupe took him everywhere and introduced him to everyone. Doors suddenly swung open for him where he couldn't get past the secretaries before. But, like all of Lupe's romances, it was typically tempestuous. a tempestuous affair. After a while, even she began to have mixed emotions about her intimate relationship with the actor who, by now, had moved into Lupe's home on Rodeo Drive. Wow. In September 1944, Mary Morris of PM, the New York newspaper, a bold experiment gone awry, interviewed Lupe. It yielded a very significant bit of news. During the course of the interview, as was usual, the question of marriage arose. Lupe's reaction surprised Morris. "I don't believe in marriage, darling. If there's children, okay, but a woman who has a career means we are here today and somewhere else tomorrow. We travel, and in our work we have a lot of men friends. I'm just being practical when I say husband and career don't mix." The statement ended Lupe's relationship with Harold Raymond. In early November 1944, a few days following the PM interview, Lupe went to her doctor's office. When she left, she was biting her lip to keep back the tears. She went directly to her home, where a birthday party was being held for her brother-in-law. She immediately drew her beloved younger sister into her bedroom and closed the door. What she told Josie startled her to say the least. After all of Lupe's tempestuous affairs, most of them in reckless abandon anywhere, anytime, and one very active marriage, she told Josie she was 3 months pregnant with Harold Raymond's baby. She told Josie she was desperately needed help because she did not want the baby. "We made plans," Josie said later. "Lupe begged me to go with her to Mexico. She told me that I was married and could adopt the baby when it was born. I told her I would be back in a month and that we could talk then." That is as far as it got. Josie had to return to San Antonio, Texas with her husband because of a house they were building which needed their supervision. Lupe never saw Josie again. Following the party, Lupe called her business manager/agent, Bo Roos, and told him of her plight. "I immediately called Raymond and asked him point blank what he intended to do about the situation," said Roos. "He told me he would have a little time to think it over. He called me back later and proposed a mock marriage ceremony. Then he called back again and said he would agree to marry Lupe only if she would sign a document saying that she knew he was marrying her to give her baby a name." So here's a picture of Johnny, aka Tarzan. Look at that boy. Huh? Let's go just a little bit further. Maybe not. Maybe we should stop here. I'm trying to think. How long is our next break? So Lupe's reaction to Raymond's demands were very strong. She immediately telephoned Luella Parsons, who had publicly announced a Velez-Raymond engagement the previous July. The breakup had not been announced in any column or feature. Lupe decided to take care of this oversight through Lolly Parsons and make sure that Raymond was finished in Hollywood. He would be when Parsons broke the story. "Lupe told me," wrote Parsons in her traditional first-person style, "that she and Raymond had one big fight and she told him to get out of her house. And when I asked her how the runt spelled his name, she told me, 'I don't know. I never did know. Who cares?'" As an afterthought, continued Parsons, Lupe added, "I like my dog's chips and chops better." Lupe had probably never made a truer statement in her life. When word got out about the oligarchy, he was forced to leave town. Every door was closed to him, doors which he could walk through with impunity. Just a few days before, a contract he was discussing for his life story as a major motion picture was torn up and abandoned. Lupe managed to keep her pregnancy secret from Luella and Hedda Hopper, and as a result, the world. But as she was 3 months along, it was a fact that had to be dealt with, and quickly. Lupe called Bruce and told him it looked like a 6 or 7 month trip to Mexico very quietly, or to a doctor known for accommodating Hollywood in matters of appendectomies. As far as Bruce could tell, at this stage, no decision had been made by Lupe as to the immediate future. That same night, Lupe attended the Hollywood premiere of her latest film, which was made in Mexico, Zaza. It co-starred Estelle Taylor, the former wife of heavyweight champ Jack Dempsey, and Benita Oca, the wife of Jack Oki. Jack Dempsey actually fought at the El Rancho here in Durango. After the screening, they all returned to Lupe's. It was then that Roos called her. During one of their conversations earlier in the day, Lupe had mentioned suicide as one way out, and it had worried Roos for the rest of the day. He pleaded with her not to take such a drastic step. Her last words to me were a promise that she would do nothing until we talked later the next day. After the conversation, Lupe returned to the living room and talked to her two friends about the problem she was facing. "I'm tired of life," she said. "I have to fight for everything. I'm so tired of it all. Ever since I was a baby in Mexico, I've been fighting. I never met a man I didn't have to fight to exist." So, we do have to go to our second music break. We're going to have to finish that story next week on Storytime with me, TessaTNT. On this break, we have the lovely Miss Mia Savage with The Bottom Line, Bury Me in Heaven, Singing to Your Grave, and Not a Face. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
right now between fear and love.
Welcome back, and thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in Rockies. Just making sure I'm unmuted. So, for the third hour, we have a creepy video to share with you. And this is going to be top 5. Let me pick this one. Top 5 scary ghost videos for instant spine tingles. And this was from Fearsome Top 5. You guys ready for it? Let's talk about it right here. Here we go.
Welcome to Fearsome Top 5. The videos that you're about to watch may just prove that ghosts exist. Number 1. The Sutcliffe Inn in Nevada has an unsettling reputation as many guests end up leaving out of fear in the middle of the night.
Oh no. Luigi Shane, let's not have this buffering going on. Come on, Mia. Let's go.
Built in 1972, this small lodge sits directly next to Pyramid Lake. After hearing reports of paranormal activity, the Researching the Paranormal Otherworldly team set their sights on investigating the inn. During a walkthrough before the investigation, a layer of dust on everything made it clear that no one had stayed there for a while. After nightfall, the team began trying to make contact with anyone on the other side. But little did they know that they would actually catch something on camera.
What do we need here? Do we know that they're all gone? What's going on?
So far, it looks like he's candid, but there's no stand up. Don't come this way.
Love dusting rods.
Is there any spirits left in this room?
That was fast.
Oh, yeah. They're hiding, man.
Okay.
It's like 10 million.
Oh, they're behind that wall.
In the hallway behind the investigators, the light in the room turned off. Then moments later, a shadowy figure walked by. This dark figure quickly walked out of the room and down the hall, managing to go completely unnoticed by the team. Now if we zoom in, we can actually see this figure's hand turn off the light right before it emerged from the darkness. But could this be the spirit responsible for scaring away guests from staying at the Sutcliffe Inn? Number 2.
Number 2.
Over on Mr. Devonish TikTok account, a guy that goes by Devilish posted a video that he can't explain. According to the uploader, this video was sent to him by a friend, and was recorded by her husband while he was staying at an Airbnb in Ontario, Canada.
Okay, that's kind of weird. This thing is moving. There's no fan on or anything. This thing's moving. Holy f... Holy f... This is like an old church. It's pretty crazy. Oh,
Wow.
that's up. Something going on in here. Okay, so like 15 minutes now. Nothing's gone on. Chandelier. Everything's good. We have this stove on because it's freaking cold in here. There's no heat, so we just put the heater on.
At least it's electric.
And yeah, there's me. Nobody else is with us. Nobody. And Carson and I were just talking, and we're like, "How are we gonna sleep here?" And he was getting a little bit worried. Like, and I was like, "No."
Are you really gonna sleep? So last time we did the World Largest Ghost Hunt, which is going on right now. If you don't know about it, check it out. But we stayed in the Grand Imperial in Silverton. I think I got about 2 hours of sleep because of the haunting there. I could not sleep. Everybody else was sleeping sound, and I was just hearing noises and seeing things all night. I don't know if you guys are gonna sleep tonight.
Oh, I don't care, like, really.
Whoa!
He began recording after noticing the chandelier eerily moving on its own. The blinds then suddenly slid shut completely on their own, making it clear that something was in the room with him. 15 minutes later, as he stood filming his friend Carson, the kettle on the counter chillingly began to glide across the surface. These creepy events looked to be signs of paranormal activity. But from this nonchalant reaction, I can't say for sure that this was not a hoax. But let me know what you think. Number 3. Solo investigator Ian from the Midwest Ghost Hunter YouTube channel set out to investigate.
I have to say, I love Ian. I love his work. He captures so many amazing things. And I don't know, since COVID happened, it's hard to get any of my teammates to go ghost hunting with me. So I might end up like Ian or Franco or whatever. I'm just afraid to go on my own because last time I went by myself to do a cleansing, I got possessed, so it's kind of scary for me.
Investigate the Oakland Cemetery. Since 1843, these 40 acres of land have served as the main cemetery for Iowa City. And within the cemetery stands an 8-foot-tall Black Angel statue that's said to be haunted. Many urban legends surround this statue, with one claiming that if you were to touch it, you would soon be dead. Come nightfall, Ian began exploring the grounds, and it didn't take long for something to be caught.
This cemetery is so vast. I gotta be careful not to get lost out here.
I salute you.
Off in the distance, I heard what sounded like a man's voice talking out loud.
Who are you? Who are you?
I heard like a male voice over there. Hello? Is there anybody over here?
Come on, let's go. Man, Floyd, get off the game. Put a message in there. Can you please get Floyd off the game? What? Let's pause. Restart. Come on, let's go. I'm gonna message Vern and see if we can get Floyd off the computer. Because this is ridiculous. Goodness gracious, 6 Live, it shows like full towers. You guys have to see this. This is intense. Intense. But nothing's responding. What is happening? Come on, let's go. I'm buffering. Man. Sorry guys for the delay. Hey, since we're here, let me bring back up this banner. Make sure you guys vote for your girl. Face of horror. Everybody's like, you don't have a face of horror. Like, okay, so Floyd should be getting off.
Okay, either I'm going crazy or those were footsteps.
This time I'm caught off guard by what sounds like disembodied footsteps walking through the grass.
I can hear it.
From a disembodied voice to disembodied footsteps, it became apparent to Ian that he was not alone. And as he asked for the spirits to call out, he got exactly what he asked for.
If there's anyone in this cemetery, and you could hear my voice, could you scream out your name?
So I have to say, as far as cemeteries, so every time I go back to Arkansas, I go to this backwoods cemetery, like, willy-nilly off in the middle of nowhere. It's freaky deaky. And my daughter just recently asked me, is that just our family cemetery? No, there's other people there too, but there's guardians in different cemeteries. And my daughter received a message that said, leave your sins at the door. So it's gated, you have to go through. That was creepy AF. But also last time I went there was some sort of soul outside of the cemetery, and it sounded like a Native American war cry. And my sister's like, hey, you want to go back there and check it out? And I'm like, no, I'm good. Let's just stay up here and not get bit by rattlesnakes or cottonmouths or whatever.
Be careful what I ask. That'd be terrifying.
I'm actually shocked that I didn't hear this EVP through my headphones at the time. You can hear this long, drawn-out whisper saying the name.
And as he ventured deeper into the cemetery, he noticed a bizarre sound in the distance.
Hear it.
What in the world was that noise? That was eerie.
I can hear the noise.
I began hearing this strange noise off in the distance.
Another scary noise in the cemetery. Let's go towards it.
Yeah,
What was
let's
that
do
sound?
that.
I just heard something.
The only way I could describe this sound is squeaking metal of some sort. I have never heard a noise like this in a cemetery before.
It almost sounded like metal squeaking.
He began to see things.
Oh, okay. Okay, that was weird.
Later in the night, I started noticing these strange white glows appearing in the corner of my vision.
That's like a weird glow.
Oh,
Right up there.
jeez.
I just saw a weird little light over here. That was cool. If only I caught it on camera.
Whenever I would try to capture these glows on the camera, they would vanish quickly before I could get to them.
Ah, dang, they keep disappearing like way too fast. Actually, I've got a really good idea. I'm going to place this camera on a tripod and just walk around, take photos everywhere. Because I want to see if I can capture one of these phantom lights that just keep popping up.
Look at that. Do you see that thing going up?
In this particular shot, you can see a glow manifesting near one of the graves.
Oh, yes. Is that Margaret's?
When I saw these pieces of video, I was completely baffled.
Wow.
Several strange glowing anomalies were caught on camera. These bright orbs would only appear for a few brief seconds, and it's hard to say exactly what these could be. After stumbling across another mausoleum, Ian was about to have a downright chilling encounter.
Look at this mausoleum right here. Hello?
Ooh.
Anyone there? tell that door hasn't been touched in ages. I got cobwebs all over my hand.
Is that cobwebs or ectoplasm? Probably cobwebs.
No way!
You can clearly hear this knocking sound on the metal door of this old crypt.
It just knocked back.
Wow.
I tried knocking back to see if it would actually occur again.
Shoot, I'm gonna try knocking again.
You're awesome, Ian.
Anyone home? Holy crap. I'm
Whoa.
gonna back up a little bit. If there's a ghost in this mausoleum, could you knock on that door again? No.
What the heck, dude?
The sound of knocking coming from the inside of the mausoleum sent chills down Ian's spine. And soon after, Ian once again caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of his eye.
What was it? Mm.
Holy shit.
I clearly saw with my own eyes a figure sitting on this flat tombstone. I couldn't make out any details.
Seriously?
It just looked
I
like
saw
a
the orb
white
fly. I
figure
didn't see the
in
figure.
the shape of a person.
Okay, either I'm going crazy or I just saw someone sitting on that tombstone over there.
I'm gonna see it
That is a
again.
microphone. It'll record your voice. Do you have any
Wow.
message? Any words of wisdom?
What?
After I asked that question, I did capture a response.
Not the angel.
By this point in the night, it was finally time for Ian to come face to face with the Black Angel statue.
It's the moment of truth. I'm gonna go up to that angel. I'm gonna touch it. I'm gonna see what happens.
What?
Alright, here goes nothing.
I decided it was time to snap some photos, and this is when things get really weird.
What happens to me?
Okay, so they said if you touch this angel, you will die shortly after. And he's like, Bink, I'm gonna touch it, and then check this out. What happens next?
Now. Whoa, she looked really messed up in that photo. What?
Out of the corner of his eye.
It was different.
Go. Okay.
What the hell was that? Exactly, Ian. What the hell?
Oh.
Wow.
Okay.
It's like errors coming through the metal.
Ian took these bizarre sounds as his sign to leave and quickly got out of the cemetery. But from this investigation alone, there's no doubt that something is lurking in the Oakland cemetery. Number 4. Back in 2020, a woman named Maddie moved into a new house with her husband. Everything was
Maddie,
going
you're so
smoothly,
pretty.
and they were both excited for this next chapter in their lives. But shortly after moving in, they felt an abrupt shift in the energy in their home. Maddie felt as if a dark presence was constantly lurking around the next corner. And late one night, she woke up to the sound of banging on her door. As she opened her eyes, she could see the doorknob wiggling as if someone were trying to get in. A little while after this incident, the security camera outside of her house caught something downright terrifying.
What the heck is that? Whoa, I just saw a shadow, like, a mist figure.
Just on the other side of her fence, a pale translucent figure paced back and forth. This eerie figure had no discernible features, and frankly barely had a body. Her dog aggressively barked at the sight of this figure, potentially being the reason that it walked away. So if this was a ghost, it looks like it's a widow baby that's afraid of dogs.
A widow baby.
Number
No,
5.
animals can sense things.
Jeff and Mark from the Ghost Tech Paranormal YouTube channel set out to investigate the Jack the Ripper Museum. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer in London, England in 1888. 5 unsolved murders of innocent women from the East End of London are believed to be linked to Jack.
skins.
Despite there being
Chicken
many
skins.
suspects for these murders, this case still remains unsolved. Open to the public in 2015, the
to
Jackson
America.
Ripper Museum showcases artifacts from the time period, as well as recreations of the crime scenes. Since the opening of the museum, staff and visitors have left the building due to paranormal activity. A dark shadow figure has been spotted in the basement, as well as seen moving from room to room. Weeks before the investigation, Jeff visited the museum to take some photos, and after taking hundreds of pictures, he noticed something unsettling in one. A shadowy figure appears to be standing in the doorway on the top floor. What looks like a shoulder and arm are visible, with the rest of the body lurking around the corner. 5 static cameras were set up throughout the museum, and Jeff was ready to begin the investigation.
Are you really ready though?
I've got someone that's
These guys are pretty cool. It's like the Foreman Brothers of the UK.
down in the reception area.
I love the
We
Foreman
did speak to her.
Brothers.
She doesn't want to go on camera. What was that banging?
There was a loud bang from behind me. I heard that, but it was not immediately behind me. It was, I don't know where it was.
We did speak to her. She doesn't want to go on camera.
Wow.
There was a loud bang from behind me.
Just minutes into the
telling me she doesn't want to go on.
strange noises are already happening throughout the building. The guys made their way upstairs in an attempt to make contact with the shadow figure that was caught in the photo. And surely enough, something was caught on their digital recorder.
Can I ask who it is that wanders on this floor? I've seen you in one of my photographs standing in the door as a shadow figure. Can you tell me your name, please? If you can hear my voice,
Jack?
could you move something inside this room?
I think he was a doctor.
If you can hear my voice, could you move something inside this room?
Wow.
Her voice is captured on the sensitive digital recorder.
What?
But we cannot decipher what the voice is saying.
Yeah.
Here is
I heard it tick, but
If you can hear my voice, could you move something inside this room?
What sounds like it could be a voice
Wow.
coming through the white noise of the recorder. The team moved on to the lounge where Mark took over the EVP session, and several questions later, he managed to receive a few responses.
What was this room like back in the days when you occupied this house? Was this used as your complete living space where you slept, ate, washed, and all the other things you do in daily living?
Mark receives an EVP, a voice saying that it was a dining room. Here is the audio taken from Mark's digital recorder, enhanced.
What was this room like back in the days when you occupied this house? Was this used as this house? Was this used as?
While in the middle of asking another question, Mark noticed something chilling standing in the doorway.
If you can hear me,
Look behind that camera, looks like there's a figure there.
oh my gosh, you gotta see this. This is insane.
you see what I'm looking at?
Not through the camera, no.
Come here, Jeff.
It's like when you're filming and you're looking through, the scope of the camera. All you see is the IR light shining through. That's what it is. Because generally you don't see that light, but through a camera you do. But you gotta see these pictures, guys. It's insane.
For some reason, it's not being
picked up on our infrared cams, our full spectrum cams, but we can actually see it with our own eyes.
Despite not being able to see
Check
this
it out.
figure on their cameras, Jeff, Phil, and Mark all claim to be able to see something in the doorway with their own eyes. Jeff then decided to take a few photos when something terrifying was
Thank
captured.
goodness Jeff did, because look at what he got.
Some photos of what we are seeing, which is standing behind our static cam.
It's a broad-shouldered man.
On our cameras, and we can only see it with our own eyes.
Oh my goodness.
But on the pictures with the flash turned off, I managed to capture the figure. Not long afterwards, the figure disappears.
Figure. Figure. Oh wow, he's got one of those folding camera phone dilly-dallies. Well, the flash it doesn't show up, but look at this. Look at him! Just look at him! He's shadow bastard!
A dark silhouette was caught in two separate photos, and the guys were unable to explain how they could see this figure with their own eyes, but not on video.
And we can't work out how or what this shadow is that's actually standing there. It looks like part of a figure. With a bowler hat on. What was that?
That's fucked up, that's what that is. That's what that is! Oh man. Okay, so on that note, I do have to go over to Spreaker. Anybody that's on Twitch or YouTube or whatnot, just hang tight, we'll finish this video. But we have to do a close for this. Thank you so much, once again, for joining me on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I had a wonderful time this evening, sharing story time with you, talking about Miss Jean Harlow and all her escapades. Science, church, not really a good thing, not really, man. I wish she would have just seen a doctor. She could have lived longer and had a full life of, living in Hollywood or Hollyweird. And thank you to all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, KPNL Radio, eTalk Radio, Twitter, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, wherever you're listening tonight. Twitch. I got my little Twitch over there. He keeps showing up, or she keeps showing up. They never say anything. But I'm so grateful that you're there, because then I don't feel alone. I hope you had a wonderful time beyond the omnibus tonight, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend. We have Mr. Patrick Cross from Canada. He's going to come in, he's going to tell some stories about his doll Boo and some other amazing paranormal things that he's dealt with. Then, of course, we have story time with me on Sunday. So, you guys tune in, check it out. It's going to be awesome. Don't forget, we're all in this together. Together, we can make the world a bit better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. Until next time, nighty-night, love and light to all my yous out there. Speaking of yous, we just had a whole herd of sheep come through town yesterday, and they went down Main Street, and now they're probably going down Buck Highway, but I will see you back here. Same crazy time, same crazy place. You guys, take care of yourself. And each other.